constant equal spin. The propaganda's a win, stress feeding on my tension. My countrymen, they love their fiction. Words are now, it's made with good intentions.
Welcome to 10200. We're here for a midweek episode to talk about BDS. Hopefully that was intelligible. It's boycott, divest, and sanctions, and particularly in regards to what's happening in Palestine at the moment. I'm joined by two guests, and I'm going to immediately hand it over to them to introduce themselves so that you can get an idea about where we're coming at this from.
Kia ora, ko Kate Stone aho, he tangata tiriti aho, e noho ana aho I tāmaki makaurau he kaimahi o Justice for Palestine. My name's Kate Stone. I am one of the co-conveners of Justice for Palestine. Nice to be with you.
Kia ora. My name's Lulu. I work with Stop Arming Israel, which is a kind of a sister organization, a branch off Justice for Palestine. So yeah, we work very closely with J4P.
Ora, Kate and Lulu. Welcome to 10200. There's been so much to try and keep up with regarding what is happening in Palestine and with the genocide being committed by Israel. And I think it's really been a struggle for people who, I was going to say get their news from mainstream sources, but it goes well beyond that at this point, because it's not just that we're not seeing reporting in Western media of what's happening on the ground in Gaza and the West Bank, but the amount of misinformation and disinformation that's being intentionally spread and amplified by reporters and journalists who we have been told we should trust, right, has made it really fraught for people to get to grips with the enormity of what's happening. Hey, this is, I think it's pretty fair to say, one of the worst, if not the worst, atrocity of the 21st century. And alongside that, the barrage when you go to try and find actual information about whether you're looking to journalists on the ground or civilians who are recording on the ground, whether you're looking to Palestine action groups or advocacy or activist groups to help fill some of that gap, when you're looking for what you can do, whether that is to give to funds of people who are in Gaza, whether it is to engage with BDS, it's really hard to get to grips with exactly who to trust. And this is part of the intent. So I guess probably the best place to kick off is, Kate, if you can let us know what Justice for Palestine stands for, and maybe a little bit more about the organization, and then we'll do the same for Stop Arming Israel, Lulu.
Yeah, kia ora. Thanks for that question. So Justice for Palestine is an Aotearoa-based Palestinian solidarity group, which stands for justice, freedom, equality, and self-determination for Palestine. And what we're about is basically doing what we can where we are to support the Palestinian struggle and be led by Palestinians in terms of what the I guess outcome is that Palestinians want, but thinking about, well, what is it that we can do on the ground here in terms of New Zealand foreign policy, in terms of solidarity at different levels of society to support Palestinians and what they're pursuing. And we do that in a number of ways. We're a democratic membership-based organisation, so we have members who are involved in regular meetings and planning our strategy and our actions. And our actions include things from protests to petitions to cultural events and opportunities for people to learn a bit more about Palestine and the Palestinian struggle. And I think part of what you were just talking about before, in terms of the disinformation and misinformation, is part of a strategy of dehumanizing Palestinians and trying to minimize what's happening there. And so I think the reason why it's important that we're active in New Zealand is partly to humanize that struggle and to help people on the other side of the world to understand that this is something that they should care about. So hopefully we contribute to that effort. Pass over to you, Lulu.
Yeah, absolutely same kaupapa for us. As I mentioned, we're a branch coming off Justice for Palestine, so we were formed from people that were very much involved with J4P and still continue to be involved. So yeah, we share all the same kaupapa kind of the difference is that we've been more focused on the research side of things and trying to help that maybe strategic direction. We're kind of maybe the nerds that aren't out there on the megaphones leading the leading the charge. We leave that to the experts at Justice for Palestine, but we're there in the background, doing research on Aotearoa's links to Israeli apartheid to really help drive some of those campaigns that Justice for Palestine are doing.
Fantastic, thank you. And I guess that takes us straight into the topic that we're going to be trying to cover today, which is the BDS movement, because we do have services and products here that are sourced in Israel, right? And I remember, was it early this year or late last year? There have been a number of smaller controversies around how we enact BDS here. So what is the real BDS list? Is there really one for New Zealand? There was some issue with an app which had some suppliers on there accidentally, and the media here did not do its job in trying to unpick that in a useful way for members of the public who might actually be legitimately involved in getting into this kind of activism. So, Kate, what is BDS? I think a lot of our audience at this stage are going to have a reasonable grasp of it, but what does it mean on this side of the world? Because we are quite far removed from some of the BDS movements that have I'd say probably a wider range of products on their BDS lists.
Yeah, so BDS, as I think you said in the intro, is boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and it's a strategy essentially that was developed from Palestinian civil society in the early 2000s, partly sort of learning from the lesson of how the apartheid regime was dismantled in South Africa. I guess stepping back a little bit, before we talk about the targets and the like, is what it's all about, right? And so the purpose of this strategy is to find effective ways in which to hold Israel to account and to end the illegal occupation of Palestine and all that goes with that. And we have seen, obviously, over the last 18 months, we've seen some of the worst atrocities that have come out of this occupation, but the occupation is over 75 years long and involves almost a kind of total system of apartheid, discrimination, ethnic cleansing, displacement. And so what we've seen is that we have numerous UN reports, numerous NGO reports, International Court of Justice decisions, all identifying that in multitudinous ways, Israel is breaching international law with huge human suffering for Palestinians. And yet this has continued for 75 years. And over the last 18 months, we've only seen it get unbearably worse. And so I guess the BDS strategy is about finding ways that move beyond the inaction and complicity of the international community and the failure of the international community to actually address these breaches of international law and look at the ways in which as societies, as individuals, as communities, as workers, we have tools at our disposal to try and bring Israel to account and to try and end these breaches of international law, but fundamentally the human suffering that comes out of them. And so in terms of the actual outcome on the ground, so the BDS campaign has three main demands. So the first is ending the occupation and colonization and dismantling the apartheid wall. So that's sort of across the occupied territories. Then there's recognizing the fundamental rights of Palestinian citizens of Israel. So that's Palestinians that live within the state of Israel. And then there's respecting, protecting, and promoting the right of return of Palestinian refugees. So these are Palestinians who've been forced from Palestine, forced from different parts of Palestine, their right to return to those places. So that's the purpose of the BDS campaign. And I'll pass over to Lulu shortly to talk about the kind of elements of the campaign, but I think one of the important attributes of the BDS strategy is that it's meant to be targeted so that we can be effective. And I guess just thinking about your question about what does it mean in New Zealand, there are specific BDS targets that the Palestinian movement has identified, but we also have to look at our context and think about, well, what are the appropriate targets here? Like, what are the ones that are operational here? What are the ones that we as civil society could be effective at targeting? And that might look a little bit different from elsewhere, but I think the key thing is that we're encouraged by the Palestinian-led strategy to think about being targeted. And then just finally that, the model is one that is aimed at institutions and attacking, I guess, the source of power rather than individuals. And it's a movement which doesn't tolerate racism in any form, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or any other kind of discrimination. So we need to be thinking about those values when we're thinking about what are the appropriate targets and how do we implement our strategies here in Aotearoa. I'll just hand over to Lulu to talk a little bit more about the three elements.
Yeah, so the BDS is structured quite deliberately with sanctions as the last point. So the idea is to build up support, build up pressure on Israel and on governments to with the goal of eventually governments applying sanctions to Israel. So it's kind of ordered of boycott, divestment, and then sanctions. In the same way that we saw with South African apartheid, it took a while for governments to start taking action. It was very much led by the people, led by the public, making more and more demands against South Africa, and that eventually led to sanctions from governments. So that's kind of the how BDS is strategized. So the boycotts is, you're fairly self-explanatory, just boycotting products that are made in Israel, that support or that are like Israeli sporting, cultural, academic institutions, any international companies that are engaged in the violation of Palestinian human rights. The next level up is divestment. So that's then urging banks and councils, churches, pension funds and universities to withdraw investments from the state of Israel. And again, those international companies that are helping to sustain Israeli apartheid. And then the idea is that as the pressure builds up, using those methods, that we then have more leverage to start demanding of the government that they apply sanctions to the state of Israel to try and alleviate the situation there. But yeah, it's as Kate said, it's very much based on the campaigns that were taken in South Africa and against South Africa during the apartheid, which is something that we as New Zealanders have a big connection to. That's a part of national pride is the anti-Springbok tours. So it's very much relevant to us, and as a colonial country that's trying to grapple with their colonial past and fight against that, we have a strong recognition and connection with the Palestinian cause and the apartheid that's going on there, and the colonialism that Israel is doing upon them. So there's very strong ties to link us, even though we are on the other side of the world, and it can feel like we're quite disconnected and quite helpless. There are things that we can do as New Zealanders, and I think that's one of the things that makes the BDS campaign so effective, is that the average person can take action in what otherwise feels like quite a helpless situation.
This is one of the things that is often leveled against activists, right? Who are trying to get these kind of actions as, oh, we're just a small little country. What could we possibly do? There's nothing that can be done. So why should the national government even bother, right? But what it sounds like in regards to the strategy of BDS is that it is intentionally scalable so that you are slowly getting more people doing the boycotting, and then that can kind of exponentially grow as you step through the different points. How do you though make that? I think there've been a couple of successful divestments in the last 18 months, but how do you? I don't know if I'm not sure exactly what the right term is, but how do you shift from that, from those some of those institutions like universities, or banks or et cetera, to effectively using that to pressure a government that is essentially ideological in its decision not to take the actions that are required under the Genocide Convention, right? How do you communicate the necessity for that shift, or provide enough pressure to make that shift inevitable?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to say is that like those wins that we've seen are the result of sustained organizing over time. And so it's great to see the wins, and it's also good to appreciate that it takes work and consistent work, and I think we shouldn't be afraid of that. It's about us kind of coming together and really using our power, and but not being disheartened when we don't win immediately. So yeah, right now we haven't got a government that has been prepared to take the action that's required under international law and to impose sanctions on Israel and do other meaningful steps. But I suppose in many ways the theory of change is the same in that with banks or companies, you're trying to demonstrate that it's not worth it for them to continue to be supporting the Israeli apartheid regime, because that's not what their customers want, and they will lose customers, they'll lose business, they'll lose money if they continue to invest. And I think with the government, it's a similar theory, except for we're thinking about the cost to politicians at the ballot box and in other ways. And so I guess demonstrating that there is public support for meaningful action, to hold Israel to account, and ultimately to uphold international law and to demonstrate that it's in our interest to do that, whether we're a small country on the other side of the world or not. And I think one of the things that people have found disheartening over the last 18 months is that, there have been thousands of New Zealanders coming out onto the streets demanding more meaningful action, and they haven't seen it from the government. And I think that's why I opened with that first comment, because I think that we shouldn't throw our hands up. We should be thinking, okay, well, that strategy is not working. What else can we do? And BDS is one of the things that the Palestinian movement has invited the international solidarity movement to join them in order to support the Palestinian liberation movement. I'm not sure if you have other whakaaro on that, Lulu.
No, you said it great. Yeah, it really comes down to the bottom line really for businesses. That's always going to be profits, and anything that hits their bottom line is the goal is to make it unaffordable to keep doing what they're doing. And the same with politicians. If people are going to vote for, if it's a toss up between two candidates and one's rabidly pro apartheid and the other is not, for a lot of people that's quite an easy distinction. We know that there'll be certain politicians further on the right that are never going to change their mind on this issue, and people aren't. I don't think anyone that really cares about the plight of the Palestinian people would be voting for them anyway. So the main target on the political sense would be those people closer to the centre that may be may have voiced support of Israel in the past, and advocating, talking to them and letting them know that this isn't something that the public is just going to let slide, and that we do actually feel very strong about. And it's, for a lot of people, it is a key issue. As we saw in the States, a lot of people sat out the last election specifically because
Yeah.
of the Democrats' support for Israel. So it's not a winning position to be on their side right now.
Just one more thing on that. We conducted some polling last year, and while there was quite a number of people who didn't know where they sat on the issue, which I think is actually good news in the sense that they're people who I think we can bring along with us on this campaign. But more people supported sanctions on Israel than didn't support them, and that number was even higher amongst young people. So I think what that shows you is that the tide is turning, that where once people might have been a little bit more sitting on the fence on this issue, thought it was complicated, I think people are really seeing now that it actually isn't complicated. It's about standing up for human rights, justice, equality, self-determination, and it's really encouraging to see that that's where young people are sitting, because that's the next round of voters. So I think if we're trying to convince politicians, I think we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah, it's very clear to see, even with the weekly marches, right? Which, people are still turning out in their thousands across multiple cities in this country. And if nothing else, it has helped to bring people into the movement. It has given that visibility and that chance to network. A pity about the political situation. But as you say, you can take next steps, right? You can take a further step. In the UK and Australia, they have very clear targets for boycotting, right? In terms of the military companies that are involved with selling weapons or selling hardware to Israel. And we've seen some pretty encouraging footage of weapons companies being protested against, and opportunities for activists to make it clear to these companies that they're not wanted, I guess is probably like a euphemistic way of saying it. Here in New Zealand, some of those lines aren't as clear, right? We don't sell military hardware, to the best of my knowledge. We don't have other hardware or software that is being directly utilized in the act of genocide, as a number of other countries genuinely do. What kind of targets are we looking at here for BDS, and how do we determine what those are?
Yeah, it's probably a good time to talk about the Don't Bank on Apartheid campaign that Justice for Palestine has been running. So the target of that is ASB, based on their investments in Motorola solutions. So they most of the big four banks, well, all of the big four banks have investments in Motorola, but ASB's was the largest of the four. So they had $14 million, or have $14 million invested in Motorola Solutions. And Motorola Solutions has been the target of BDS across the world for quite some time now. They do a lot of support for the Israeli occupation in the West Bank. So they provide communications and surveillance technology that's used in checkpoints and in the apartheid wall. They provide things like cameras that are used around settlements or illegal settlements to keep Palestinians out of those settlements. And often those settlements are built on Palestinian land. So Motorola technology is being used to keep Palestinians out of their own land. They're also the sole provider of the IDF's cellular network, communications network, and they have a contract to supply the encrypted, or that they developed encrypted mobile phones specifically for the Israeli military. So we've heard this. What's happening in Gaza be described as the world's first live-streamed genocide, and the cellular networks and the mobile phones that Motorola are providing are one of the key components that are being used to live stream this genocide. So they're very much implicated in all this, and they're quite a common investment for a lot of people's Kiwisavers. Our own sovereign wealth fund, the Super Fund, is invested in Motorola. Most banks have investments with them. So there is a strong tie here in Aotearoa with investments in companies that are doing pretty abhorrent things and supporting Israeli apartheid.
Yeah, that's a pretty clear financial link to a company benefiting from Israeli apartheid and probably the genocide at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the communications that they're using in the field to coordinate attacks when they're bombing civilians is done over the Motorola network that's provided to them.
So what's the goal then? Is it just to say, hey, banks, well, ASB in this particular case, right? We want you to pull that funding out.
I think as Lulu was saying before, there's a number of institutions that are invested in Motorola. Of the Kiwisaver Funds, ASB was the one that had the biggest investment, so most significant if we get them to divest. The part of the rationale for choosing a Kiwisaver fund is that most people in New Zealand have a Kiwisaver fund, and for most of us, it's probably one of the biggest sums of money. So it's the biggest sort of purchasing power we have in terms of making the choice to switch your KiwiSaver if you don't agree with the investments of your provider. So in terms of what we were talking about before, with BDS being a means by which individuals, everyday people, can try and exercise the power that they have collectively to create change in the face of an action of those who have more power. KiwiSaver Funds is one of the ways that we can do that. And so ASB is one of the really big KiwiSaver providers, and the sizable investment that they have in Motorola made sense. But the ultimate vision for the campaign is that there's a future in which no New Zealanders' money is invested in Israeli apartheid. And so while we're targeting ASB and their investment in Motorola for now, we're really trying to send a message to all financial institutions in New Zealand that New Zealanders don't want their money invested in Israeli apartheid, and so they ought to be looking at their investments and ensuring that they aren't complicit in the current genocide or in the wider occupation of Palestine, which has been deemed to be illegal.
Yeah, this is one of those things where you get into the discussion of actually everyone in the West is complicit, right? Unless you're actively acting against what's happening there. Because we have structures that are set up to tacitly, at the very least, support what's happening there. And this is one of those really clear ways in which that's happening, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, Israel is only able to continue to do what it's doing because it's financed by the international community to do so.
Yeah, so one of the biggest divestments around the world that even well, all New Zealand banks have also followed suit is for Israeli banks. So these are banks that are financing illegal settlements in occupied Palestinian territory. So there's the UN list of organizations that materially support the Israeli apartheid and occupation of the West Bank. And these Israeli banks are listed on there, as is Motorola and other organizations. So there's already been a global condemnation of those banks, and all banks in Aotearoa have divested from those banks. So it's not much of a step to say, why haven't you divested from Motorola, which is also listed on this UN human rights list of complicit organizations.
Is there any thoughts as to why they haven't?
Part of the reason is that it's a subsidiary, so it's Motorola Solutions Israel. So there's a nice convenient scapegoat there to say, oh, it's Motorola Solutions as a global organization that has its fingers in many pies is clean generally. It's just this one subsidiary over here, and they'll say that they don't have investments in Motorola Solutions Israel, but they do have investments in the parent company, and effectively it's the same thing. They're still not absolved of funding Motorola by just owning investing in the parent, and not the one that's got the contracts with the Israeli government.
Have any New Zealand banks already taken the step to divest further, or are all New Zealand banks currently?
All of the big four, all of the big four Australian ones, all have investments in Motorola still. There have been other divestments from Israeli companies or from organizations that are supporting Israel. The biggest of those was our super fund dropping those Israeli banks back in 2021. But there has been some other ones, but this is still one of the biggest investments value wise. There's a lot of smaller Israeli companies that organizations will have, tens of thousands of dollars.
Mhm.
So it's kind of a rounding error on the global scale of things. But
Yeah.
investments in Motorola and things like Caterpillar are some of the ones that actually have tens of millions of dollars, or if not hundreds of millions of dollars, in this country invested in them. So it's a significant amount of money.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that big divestment was in 2021, right? So before this acceleration of the genocide, when we already understood, and these commercial enterprises already understood that this was at the very least bad for business, even if they didn't have like a humanitarian reason for doing it. And yet, in the last 18 months, they still haven't seen the need to take it upon themselves to divest. So how do what is the strategy for getting them to divest? How is the campaign shaping up?
Yeah, so um, when we launched the Don't Bank on Apartheid campaign last year, and in particular our target of ASB, gave ASB a deadline, and we said, you might not have turned your mind to this, but you've got this investment that we don't like because you're investing in apartheid. And we had people sign a petition indicating their support for the campaign, and in particular ASB customers indicating that they would switch their Kiwisaver funds if ASB didn't divest by Palestinian Solidarity Day, which was 29 November last year. And we had over 8,000 people sign up to support ASB divesting, and probably about a third of those were ASB customers who committed to switching if they didn't divest. And so on top of that, we've had people all across the country getting out in front of their banks, talking to customers, explaining where ASB is investing their money. Lots of people, thousands of people emailing ASB directly and saying that they want them to divest, but they haven't divested yet. Not surprised that they haven't divested. As I said earlier, BDS campaigns, you're running a long game. But what we have learned over the course of the campaign, principally through a meeting we had with ASB, is that they have a framework for their exclusions. So how they decide what they're not going to invest in. And there's a number of things which they take into account. They do consider international convention. Surprisingly, they didn't seem to think that Motorola was an issue on the international conventions, even though there's the UN list indicating that they are in fact supporting the maintenance of the illegal settlements, and there's multitude of reports and court decisions indicating what's unlawful about those settlements. They also take into account broad political consensus and where the majority of New Zealanders are at. And then finally, they said that they take into account direct engagement with the relevant parties. So they deemed those to be both Motorola and the UN. Interestingly, they didn't consider Palestinians to be a relevant party here. But
Yikes.
they said that they were going to be engaging with Motorola and the UN over the summer, and we've followed up with them to find out what the outcome of those meetings were, but haven't had except through the media, where they indicated that they had done made their assessment and didn't find that Motorola met their exclusions criteria. But we have no idea what evidence they've used other than Motorola telling them that they didn't meet their exclusions criteria. But one of the issues that we've come up against is that the banks, and I suppose probably a lot of investment companies, rely on third-party providers to make their assessments on the kind of sustainability and human rights factors that they might choose to make investments on. Maybe I'll pass over to you, Lulu, to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so the pretty much all investment organizations across the world do, or at least ones that have any kind of social good component, or try and frame themselves as being for social good.
So the ones that aren't completely evil.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. The ones that aren't happily investing in bombs and things like that, the ones that at least try and distance themselves a little bit from that. do a thing called ESG screening of their investments. That's environmental, social, and governance screening to basically initially run through before they have any of their investment managers look through an investment. They'll run it through this screen to see if it's if it's supporting fossil fuels or alcohol or gambling or weapons, all those sorts of things. So this screening, there's two main companies that provide the screening on the planet. One of those is Sustainalytics, and unfortunately, Sustainalytics is heavily compromised now. So back in 2021, they were a target of US and pro-Israel organizations putting extreme pressure on them, saying that by them pointing to the UN Human Rights Council and other sources when they were assessing Israeli companies and saying that they were complicit in human rights abuses. These like attorney generals in right-wing US states, conservative states, and other government agencies that have a lot of power started sending letters to Sustainalytics accusing them of anti-Israel bias and basically threatening to shut them down or bankrupt them if they didn't change their policies to be less anti-Israel. So they, in the light of that, after caving to that pressure, they made a number of changes, and I might just read these out as they stated them, because they speak for themselves, really. So Sustainalytics will immediately terminate the use of several sources, including the United Nations Human Rights Council, among others.
You're fucking kidding.
Sustainalytics will use geographic names in relevant regions rather than terms such as occupied Palestinian territory or occupied territory. It will remove references to the boycott, divest, sanctions campaign, and it will provide additional documented guidance to ensure that its analysts understand that business activity, including but not limited to sectors such as telecommunications, banking, real estate, and construction, within the regions linked to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or related to Israel's defense against terrorism, do not give rise to a presumption that there is human rights concern. So this is the company that provides most of the world's ESG screening, and these are the rules that they stand by now to make those decisions on whether an investment is ethical or not. So I don't know. I don't want to speak for your listeners, but
I will.
if you're saying that the United Nations Human Rights Council is not a valid source, it's not a good sign for you on what's ethical.
Yeah, that's wild. But all of the people who use this company to do ESG screening would know that this has happened, right? Like they're not going to be like, oh, like I never knew that they had this pressure on them, this company that everyone uses. They're playing into plausible deniability on some level.
Yeah, I'm sure they are. Yeah, it was quite a it was all over the news back in 2021 and 2022 when these it was 30 or 40 US attorneys generals signing a letter saying that this company is anti-Israel and that they're gonna ban them from the state and things like that. So it was a significant deal.
And just on ASB in particular, when we met with them, we provided them with this information. So if they weren't aware of it before, they are now.
Oops. And do you have any idea about when they will get back to you with their findings, or will they even do so?
I don't. I mean, it would be great if they did. If they're listening, we're all ears. If there's evidence that Motorola is no longer supporting Israeli apartheid, that would be great news. But I suspect that's not the case. So it seems like they wanted to engage with us in the hopes that we'd sort of just accept what they had to say and drop the campaign. But now that it's clear that we're not going to do that, maybe they're not so keen to engage. But I think the point is we're here to stay. There's lots of people who support this campaign, and the solidarity movement is only growing. So we're going to keep building the campaign we're not going anywhere until we see ASB and other New Zealand Kiwisaver providers divest from Israeli apartheid. So we don't have a time frame on that, but we're aware that these campaigns are a long game, and we're in it for the long haul. I mean, I think we started with the ask where we said, like, look, you've got this gap, you've got this time frame in which to divest, and they didn't do that. And we've had a number of tactics where folks have been out front trying to educate and just trying to make people aware. But there's lots of other tools in the toolkit of the BDS movement, and so we're not going anywhere anytime soon.
Let's talk about some of those tools because this is seem to have made a decision about not divesting. Where does the campaign go now? If the campaign's going to be in it for the long haul, what are the next steps that you get to take?
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of different things that you can use when you're running a BDS campaign. Obviously, there's the power that ASB customers have to pressure their own bank or their own Kiwisaver provider to behave differently. And so there's heaps more rope for us to pull on in terms of getting more customers to realize that their bank is invested in Israeli apartheid and to put pressure on them to divest. But it's actually been amazing to see the links people are prepared to go to. We've had people who have been switching their mortgages, been switching like banking with ASB, and they've been banking with them for 30 years. So,
Wow.
there's lots of people out there who are prepared to make that switch. Then there's also just engaging more broadly with the wider public around actually thinking about who your Kiwisaver is, what they're invested in, and basically sending that signal to the market through general public campaigning, brand damage, protests, to send that signal that that's not worth it to continue to be invested in Israeli apartheid. Then there's other levers more in the regulatory space, and this is where we come up against, I guess, the issue of inaction in government. But your listeners might have heard about the sanctions bill that Green MP Chloe Swarbrick has put in place. So that's a members bill which at this stage hasn't been drawn yet, so can't be debated by Parliament. But we just need 6 government MPs to say that they'll support it, and it could be put before the House to be debated. But something like that potentially provides the regulatory framework in which it would mean that banks would have to be looking more carefully at their investments and potentially wouldn't be able to be invested in things where they could be financing the illegal occupation. So there's a number of fronts on which we can continue to fight. And I think on the sanctions bill, I think that's another example where there's a new, I guess, source of power for individuals in the community, because we need people to be getting out there, talking to their MPs, talking to them about why it matters to them. Like we were talking about before, about what is it that's going to make our politicians change their mind? It's their voters coming out and telling them that this is something they care about, and actually it's something which will influence their voting next time, and they want to see their MPs coming up and standing up on this issue. So that might not be directly focused on ASB or other divestment target, but it potentially changes the playing field in terms of what choices our Kiwisaver and other investment providers have to make about their investment.
Is there a roadmap heading into 2026 when we have an election here in New Zealand then?
In terms of the sanctions bill?
Yeah, in terms of the BDS and the way that, I guess, the public narrative will interact with your ability to run a campaign alongside it.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. As Lulu was saying at the outset when talking about BDS, there's the different rungs to it. There's the consumer boycott, there's the divestment piece, and there's the sanctions piece. The sanctions piece is the most obvious one in terms of government action, specifically sanctioning Israel, and certainly, ideally, before the election in 2026, we get it before the House and we get the government voting in favour of it. But
Yeah.
we want to be going into the 2026 election with all politicians and all parties being under no illusions that there is majority populist support for meaningful action on Israel, including sanctions. The sanctions piece and other regulatory frameworks like export controls and import controls also potentially have implications for those other rungs in terms of divestment and consumer boycott. So what can be brought into New Zealand, what can be exported out of New Zealand. And so those are the kinds of issues that we can be campaigning on with our, with the people who are standing in our electorates, and the political parties in terms of what their manifestos are coming into the election. So, I mean, I think the sanctions bill provides us with a really nice opportunity to make a time to sit down with your MP, talk to them about that bill, but also talk to them about the other things that they could be doing to support Palestine, recognizing Palestine as a state and inviting Palestine to present diplomatic credentials so that we have a counterpart in Palestine to talk to and to understand what they want, rather than that being mediated through other parties. Setting up a humanitarian visa category so people in Gaza and other parts of Palestine are able to escape the unbearable conditions that they're in right now, if that's what they choose to do. At the moment, they don't have any choices. And so, I think there's a number of fronts where our political actors have choices they can make, and we need to be, in the lead up to the 2026 election, pressuring them to make the right choices to support Palestine.
And what other things are kind of going on in the background while this is happening? You mentioned here that there are other BDS targets and actions that are also in play at the moment, apart from this main campaign with ASB.
A lot of especially internationally, there's a lot of push against Israeli arms manufacturers or international arms manufacturers. There's also within New Zealand on the boycott side, we've got Israeli companies like SodaStream, Obelo Hummus. There was a big targeted campaign against last year. There's calls from the BDS movement to boycott Coke, McDonald's, Disney, Caltex. There's a whole range on the BDS site of just point to consumers to some of these companies that have supported Israel, and just in a nice, easy to read list so that you don't make it as easy as possible for people. Another thing that I would strongly encourage people to do is go to Mindful Money and check out use the tools that they have there to check your Kiwisaver funds and check your investment funds, to make sure that that gives a full breakdown of everything that your fund's invested in, and especially and highlights the problematic investments that are in there. So it'll take 5 minutes to do, and you could find out whether some of your investments are going towards Israeli apartheid or not.
Just on the sanctions front, alongside colleagues at DAINU, which is a Jewish group against the occupation, we're organising an online training session with Chloe Swarbrick around how to lobby your MP on the sanctions bill. So really encourage people to get along to that, because I think part of the purpose of running a BDS campaign is that we're upskilling ourselves, our community, around how to be effective organisers for change. And this is an opportunity for folks to learn how to lobby your MP on Palestine, but also on other issues as well. We know that there's so many kaupapa at the moment that people are having to think about how can they get active on, how can they effectively try and prevent some of the negative changes that we're seeing happening around us. So this is an opportunity to build skills for Palestine, but also the wider movement as well.
Fantastic. And if people want to get involved directly with Justice for Palestine or Stop Harming Israel, how would they go about that?
Yes. We have a website, justiceforpalestine.nz, and you can click on the join us button, and you can sign up to become a member, or to subscribe to our com. And that's probably the best way, and follow us on social media. And I think, yeah, Lulu, and maybe that's possibly even the best way to kind of get into Stop Arming Israel as well. If folks are keen to be involved with Stop Arming Israel, they can let us know once they've joined up for J4P.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we do have a website as well where we put some of our research, stoparmingisrael.nz. But yeah, I would encourage people to go to Justice for Palestine first and become a member through there, and then get in touch and let us know that you want to get involved with the co-papa.
Fantastic. Well, I'll drop some of those links into the summary as well, which will make it easier for everyone to find. So get along and join up. I think that's been one of the really valuable things out of these movements, right? Is giving people the ability to be empowered and actually do something when they're seeing these horrible images. You know, you said, Lulu, it's been live streamed to us. And sometimes you can just feel really helpless. But there are so many good people in these movements. And if you've been down to a march, you'll see just like the energy there is incredible. Getting involved in organizing and actually learning the ways to interact with this political apparatus that doesn't want to engage with us is the first step to actually making a change sometimes.
Totally.
Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us on 1 of 200 today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Oh, absolutely. Come back. Tell us more. Is there anything else you wanted to add just as we close up the episode?
Hopefully we won't need to come back because there won't be an issue anymore.
Yeah, just to just in terms of what you just said, like I think we at Justice Palestine are really focused on the organizing piece. So if you're feeling despair about what's happening, find the group in your local area or join J4P, because I firmly believe that, you know, together we can make change, but we need to be organized to fight the powers that be that, as you say, don't want to hear from us. So yeah, get amongst it, get organized.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
One of my favorite anarchist podcasters said that agency is the opposite of trauma, and that really resonated with me. I think that's a great way to look at things, and it, as you said, when you're feeling helpless and just seeing how terrible things are in the world, actually being able to take any action, really does help you sleep better at night.
Fantastic. So click some of those links below, get involved, even if that's just letting ASB know that you're no longer going to do business with them. There are so many different ways to show your discontent at a minimum with what's happening in Palestine. If you think that there are other people who might learn a lot from this episode, share it around, let people know that we are having these conversations. There are organizations out there that are trying to make a difference, that you can engage with and learn more and do more. We'll be back with a current events episode on the weekend, but this has been another one for you, midweek, 1 of 200. We'll catch you next time.
If artificers are then I'm living a pointless life, but learning all your lessons. Fucking politics, there's no distinction. The road's upon now is paved with good intentions, and I'll admit that I'm at a loss for what to say when they criticize a cost we ought to stay. I live amongst the people every day in this vindictive, forgetful fucking race.